خلينا نبدأ. Today we'll continue talking about group dynamics. One of the topics that we need to discuss is group decision making. In previous chapters we have discussed individual decision making. This time we are going to discuss how groups act or behave while taking decisions. Now, of course, when we talk about group decision making, we talk about another alternative. This means that we have two alternatives. Either we are going to depend on individuals to take decisions, or we can depend on groups to take decisions. Now, that's why we need to discuss what are the strengths and weaknesses when we talk about group decision making. What are the most important strengths? Yes?
That the group members bring so many ideas and inputs to the problem itself.
We are talking about more than one individual. This means more ideas, more point of views, more experiences, and this ensures variety of all those issues that we have mentioned. This is one of the most important advantages when we talk about group decision making. Now, while we are discussing advantages, we need to take into consideration that those advantages means also that when we can use a group to take decisions. And if we need a variety of ideas, then it is advisable here to use groups than using an individual, and so on. Okay. Of course, when we are going to talk about disadvantages, it means that if those disadvantages are going to appear, then maybe it is better to take, at least in some cases, to allow individuals to take decisions rather than depending on groups. What other advantages are there in addition to ideas and variety of experiences? Yes? Exactly, and resistance to changes is going to be less, and of course here we are talking about more acceptance to decisions taken by the group members. What also? What other advantages also for group decision making?
There is some kind of diversity of views, which means that there are different alternatives to be discussed.
And this is one of the issues. In addition to different experiences and different backgrounds and so on, this means that we can have more alternatives. Also, we can talk more here about the results. Groups usually take decisions, I mean here the results of decisions taken by groups, usually it is much better than individuals, at least in the cases where we need groups. And those cases, again, it is where we need more than one point of view, we need a variety of experiences and so on. So there are advantages here. Okay, we are talking about the sum of data that can be collected and knowledge that we can use in addition to experiences and so on. We are talking about the diversity of ideas due to different contributions by members of any group. We are talking about the acceptance after that and less resistance to change, and this is in favor of, when we talk about implementation, this is useful while we are implementing any results obtained or achieved by the group. Also, we are talking here about the accuracy. Okay, but usually, and this is important, in any group, when you talk about the individuals, not all individuals are having the same level of experience, or we can say here abstract thinking abilities and so on. That's why maybe the group can reach a decision, and comparing this decision, if we are going to give opportunity to individuals who are members in a group to take the decision individually, the group as a whole, they are going to take better decision. But usually within any group there are superior individuals. Comparing them to others, usually such individuals, they might reach better solution, they might propose better alternatives. But when we talk about here consensus between the group to take one decision, usually the group, they take a decision, the quality of this decision, it is much better than individuals how they are going to deal with the situation, but not, as it is mentioned here, not as accurate as the superior individual, we can say, or the best individual among a group members. Now, on the other hand, there are weaknesses here, okay? When you talk about the weaknesses, one of the most important weaknesses when you talk about the groups, time consuming, because there are more individuals. Discussions usually taking time. Sometimes discussions are driven out of the course. Instead of discussing only issues related to the problem or developing alternatives and so on, sometimes they start to go out of the course, and this means that there is some sort of wastage of time here when we talk about groups. Another issue, we have studied conformity earlier, and this is a negative attitude. And here, when you talk about a group, there is a conformity pressure. Sometimes the group members, instead of maintaining or keep discussing the points and proposing new ideas, sometimes in sake of reaching a final decision, they are going to stop on they are going to leave it at a certain level, instead of digging more for solutions or developing alternatives and so on. So conformity pressure is one of the issues here. Also, when you talk about groups, sometimes the groups are dominated by some individuals, especially those who are having the power, for example. Sometimes they have the charisma, sometimes they have maybe the logic, the knowledge, the skills, etc. But if a group of individuals within the group or a certain individual is going to control the group, this means that all those advantages we are not going to use, because this means that an individual is taking the decision but inside a group. But we are not talking here about a group decision making. That's why it is important to assure that all individuals have the opportunity or the chance to discuss, to propose ideas, to evaluate, to help in developing alternatives. I mean here, of course, all the steps which is related to decision making. So this is another issue. Also, sometimes if the responsibilities are not assigned in a very professional manner, we are afraid here, of course, of losing the most of those advantages, because the communication is important. How to have all the contributions also, it is important. So if we are talking about ambiguous responsibilities here, then who is the leader? Who is going to lead some tasks, for example? Who is going to participate in a certain situation? All those issues are not going to be very clear, and this is going to cause some confusion within the group while taking the decisions. And this, of course, it is going to affect the final results. And of course, we are talking here about negative effects. Now, comparing group decision-making to individual decision-making, we need here to talk about effectiveness and efficiency. Which is more effective and efficient, group decision-making or individual decision-making? Yes?
It all depends on the context. It means that we have to look at the task that needs to be done and identify whether to use the group decision-making or the individual.
Okay. We all agree on that. Always we deal with situations, and of course there is an approach in management, we call it the situational approach. And the situational approach, it means that we deal with each case as a separate case, and according to the situation itself, we decide what to do, what is the best fit procedure to be done here, or mechanisms to be used, and so on. But when you talk about group decision making and individual decision making, this is a basic ground how we should think about all the situations in addition to this situation. But generally, when we talk about the group decision making and comparing it to individual decision making, okay, again, we need to find out what is better for the situation, to use group decisions or individual decision making process. But when you talk about effectiveness and efficiency, it is said that group decision making are more effective. But when you talk about individual decision making, it is more efficient. Why? Why group? Though the point that you have mentioned, it is important and it is true, and this is how we need to decide whether to use group decision making or individual decision making process. But still, when you talk about group decision making, it is more effective than, in most cases at least, than individual decision making. But on the other hand, individual decision making, it is more efficient than group decision making. Why? Yes. Okay. What is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency in general? What is effectiveness and what is efficiency? Yes?
Efficiency, it depends on using the least input to generate
Okay.
the best output. And this actually is compatible with the individual decision making, because we are using only one.
And as your colleague said, that less time and so on, and that's why it is more efficient. What is effectiveness?
Effectiveness depends on doing things right.
Achieving goals.
Achieving the goals after all. And this is that's why the group decision making is usually more helpful, because all people collaborate.
And the accuracy is very high when we talk about the group decision making, and and this means that they can achieve goals. When you talk about effectiveness, we are talking up to what extent we have achieved our objectives and goals. When we talk about efficiency, we are talking about how we have achieved those goals and objectives, using, of course, less input to obtain the maximum output. The more there is, we can say here, we can say gap between input and input, the more we are efficient. The more the input is less and the output, of course, is higher. If it is the opposite, we are talking about less efficiency. If the output is less and the input, so the gap here is that it should be that the input is less and the output is higher. So when you talk about effectiveness, we are talking about achieving goals. When you talk about efficiency, we are talking about how we have achieved those goals. That's why when you talk about a group decision making, there is high accuracy when we're talking about solving different problems while taking decisions, and that's why we said that the group process is more effective. When we talk about individuals, we are talking about less time and of course less human effort here. We are talking, of course, this means less cost also, in addition to other issues, and that's why we said that it is more efficient. But whether we are going to use a group process or individual process, this depends on the situation. What is the best alternative that we can depend on? If the situation demands group process, then we need to form a group to deal with the situation and take the right decision. If the situation demands to depend on individuals, then we are going to use the other process. Okay. Now, still we are talking about group decision making. Some of the problems that face groups while they deal with different situations, there are two situations that we are going to discuss here, or two problems, sorry, a group think and a group shift. Okay. Now, when we talk about a group think, here we are talking about up to what extent sometimes group members, they do not participate in discussing some issues or solutions or alternatives because they want to wrap up the situation, and sometimes maybe they do not want to create a conflict, for example, and so on. So here we are talking about some sort of conformity among the group members. But this conformity, it means that there are maybe unusual ideas which is not going to be discussed. And we form groups to obtain ideas. Sometimes there are people who are maybe weak members within the group who are not going to participate effectively. And this means we are not utilizing groups, because again we are not utilizing all group members here. And the same when we talk about unpopular views and so on. So here we are talking about some sort of conformity, and in this case usually we lose some of the ideas or contributions which is important. Okay, so this we call a group thing. Now, when we talk about a group shift, we are talking about another problem here. Now, in a group shift, usually the individuals, when they feel that we almost finish and almost we are reaching a decision or a solution for the problem, they start digging up on previous ideas that they have proposed. And they open the discussion again. And they undermine the idea that almost all the group they have reached at the end. This causes, again, the group to go through the process maybe sometimes again, and they start, instead of finalizing the problem, they start to open the discussion again here, and this means that more time is needed here in order to reach a solution to the problem. So when we talk about a group shift, it is shifting from almost the final stage to the beginning stages again, and the discussion is open again unnecessarily. That's why we said that those are a problem. So in this problem, usually what is done that we are not utilizing all the experiences, point of views, skills, and so on. Here what is happening, the problem is that we are losing time in discussing some issues which already was discussed. Okay, so how a group shift happens, some individuals within the group, when they almost reach the final stage, they start remind the group about some ideas that they have proposed at the beginning, and they start to defend those ideas and of course initiate some sort of discussion about those ideas, though those ideas were discussed initially at the beginning of the process. Okay. Again, when you talk about the groupthink and the group shift, here we are talking about problems facing groups while taking decisions. Still, we are talking about group decision making, and more we are going to talk about the groupthink, because this is one of the most common problems that happen while taking decisions by groups. Okay. Now, what we need to discuss first is what are the symptoms of a group think. Okay? When you talk about a group think, sometimes, for example, we find that some individuals, they do not participate. Their contribution is minimal. They do not participate actively in the discussions. This is one of the symptoms which is associated with a group think problems. What other symptoms we can think about? What other symptoms here we can think about in addition to weak participation of some of the individuals who are, of course, members of the group? When we describe groupthink, we said that some individuals start to remind the group with previous ideas proposed by them, and usually some individuals, they do not participate. Exactly. And sometimes when individuals, they try to propose some new ideas, they are attacked by other group members. Okay. And here we are talking about group members rationalizing any, of course, resistance to the assumptions they have made, okay, in order to reach to some sort of consensus among the group. And that's why we said that it appears to be that there is some sort of unanimity here or consensus, but it is only an illusion. It seems that everything is okay and we are agreeing on everything, but inside each individual or internally, most of the individuals, they only want to finish the issue without creating a problem or conflict and so on. So here we are talking about sometimes even the members, they apply pressure on some people who are trying to propose something different or something new. So we are talking here about some symptoms. Most of those symptoms are related to how individuals participate and how others are dealing with the participation or the contribution. Usually there is some sort of aggressive, defensive by other people who are agreeing on the solutions that the group are believing in, or some of the group members are believing in. Now, how to minimize groupthink? It is known that groupthink is less available when we talk about smaller groups. So in larger groups, groupthink is more available, or there is more high chance to occur. In addition to that, of course, the leadership role is very important here. If there is less fairness by leadership, this means that there is some sort of problem. That's why it is important that group leaders must be impartial, or they must be fair while judging different ideas and dealing with all the individuals who are participating in solving the problem. One of the terminologies that we need to go through here, we can use devil advocate. But of course, we are not talking about negative rule here. We are more talking about positive rule, though we are talking about the devil, okay? But here, we are talking about some individuals who can always challenge or open space for discussion, or highlight on some of the ideas which is proposed by other individuals in order to loosen the situation among the group members. Okay. Of course, diversity is very important. When we talk about diversity, it is a skill, and also it is an attitude, and also a side of it is determined by some values. Okay, so those people who more believe about diversity, those people who more accept diversity, and those people who are more willing to deal with diversity, usually those people are positive contributors to such situations. Of course, when you talk about the opposite, here we are talking about negative contribution. Okay, any questions till now? Last thing to talk about, because I think you have some questionnaire here to fill. Let us talk about group decision-making techniques. Okay, maybe one of the most famous is brainstorming. When we talk about brainstorming, not necessarily it is the best, but maybe it is known for all of us. When you talk about brainstorming is a mechanism which we use in order to generate ideas. So it is a mechanism of generating ideas, okay? But when you talk about interacting groups, here we are talking about group members meeting face to face, okay? And they rely on verbal and non-verbal communication. It means here that there is data, they start to analyze the data, they start to interpret the data until they, of course, they go through the process until they reach a decision. But what is the difference between those two? Because in both situations, we are talking about people meeting together and discussing issues. Brainstorming, it is important to generate ideas, okay? Maybe when we talk about interacting groups, it is not the issue of generating ideas, more it is the issue of reaching a solution for the problem. That's why when we talk about brainstorming, usually it is time consuming. Why? Because we need time to discuss issues and generate new ideas on continuous basis. Now, there is also another technique here, which is nominal group technique. In nominal group technique, usually there is a discussion, as it is available in brainstorming, but this discussion is time limited. Okay, we are not talking about open discussion here. We are talking more about there are guidelines where where all the group members must, I mean here, of course, obey, or they must show commitment to those guidelines. Here we are talking about a discussion, but there are restrictions on this discussion. At the same time, there is more individual work than group work. يعني usually the individual, they work alone and then they join each other to wrap up the situation or summarize the situation or agree on a certain point, and then they might go again through the same process and so on. Sometimes not as individuals, sometimes as small groups, and then they join the large group. Here we are talking about more trying to we try to less waste the time. Okay, we try to utilize the time better. Of course, sometimes when there are ambiguous problems or critical problems and we need more discussion, it is more advisable to use brainstorming. Again, we are talking about alternatives, and none of those alternatives is best fit for all situations. Again, we need to talk about the situation, analyze the situation, and find out what is the best way to deal with the situation. Another group decision-making technique is electronic meeting. Electronic meeting we cannot consider as a total technique. More here we are talking about, maybe we are going to do brainstorming, but using video conference because there is distance problems, okay? Or maybe we are going to use interacting groups, but we are again going to use some video conference or internet or whatever tool is available. So more here we are talking about using technology, and this usually it is used when there is large groups and there are distance problems here. I mean here, of course, they are located in different places, or there is a problem of meeting together face to face and so on. Yani, sometimes there is no distance problems or there is no distances between those group members, but they are under pressure because of time, and instead of formally have a meeting in a certain place, they are going to use some intranet circle, or they might use video conference or any other tool which might facilitate communication between those group members. طيب كيف اليوم؟ طبعا في قبل ما تطلعوا ما حدش يطلع فيه بس استبانة